some homeschoolers, some resources, things that can help you. We are resources, but I just want to remind you that you all have resources in your lives as well. You have grandparents and parents who can watch kids, or friends who you can trade with, child resources and child care. And so just a reminder to look around at the resources around you. It might be different than it usually looks like, but they can, there's a lot of people willing to help. So just also some thoughts here before we begin. Homeschooling is a big job and a big undertaking even under normal circumstances. So it can feel overwhelming to us, and it sometimes does. And so just know that that's normal. It's actually, even when you're not in a pandemic, it's normal to feel overwhelmed. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, just, it'll be okay. Reach out to us and let us help you and encourage you. The people up here on our panel, who will meet in a minute here, have seen that homeschooling is worth it, and it's been a blessing to our families, and so it could be a good thing for your family too. We've had a lot of questions submitted from the audience, and a lot of them were similar, and so we've combined a lot of them, so you might not hear your question exactly as you phrased it, but we do hope to speak to every question that was given to us in your registration. So I do suggest we are going to just keep plowing through the topics. So we're going to talk about legal requirements, record keeping, tracking learning, curriculum, social life, and working parents. So if you have things you want to remember, or questions that you have for us that you might want to ask more detail about at the end, feel free to take notes, because that will probably help you. It's going to be a lot of information in a quick period of time. So I think with that, we're going to introduce who we are, and I'll just go ahead and start with me. So I was actually homeschooled my whole life. My mom started homeschooling my brother and sister when I was 3, and did that when homeschooling wasn't cool. So I'm a lifer. But when so I went to college at Hillsdale College in Michigan, and came back with this guy. We got married and came back to Colorado, and we both did education policy research. And I maintained a website that helped parents find schools for their kids, and so I've been in the education world off and on a lot. Our kids went to public school until we moved here 4.5 years ago, and it was mid-year, and we were like, it's a bad time to put your kids in a new school, and so we thought we'd try homeschooling, and we ended up liking it and finding support and friends and stuff. So I think that's enough for me. So I'm going to pass it along to Ben, and everyone can just give us a brief bio, summary of how many kids you have, and so take it away.
So hi, I'm Ben DeGrow, and probably my greatest accomplishment that gets me here is the father of 3 kids and a supporting wife who's our lead homeschool teacher. But I also happen to be privileged enough to think about and write about issues related to education for a living, and so that's why they drafted me onto this panel. And so I'm happy to share my wisdom and insights and things I've learned with you, and I'm always available to answer questions. My guiding light and guiding principle in the education policy work I do is that parents are the first primary decision makers for their kids when it comes to education, and we should trust them to make the best decisions. So if that ends up being homeschooling, we want to support you. If that ends up being something else, we want to support you. But that's the work I do at the Mackinac Center here in Midland, and I'm just happy to be on the panel.
Hi, my name is Karen Lehman, and I originally came to Midland to work for Dow, which I did for about 12 years. And when my 3rd child was born, we decided to stop working, and I decided to stop working and homeschool. And at first I thought it was kind of a crazy idea that some friends of ours were doing, but I really liked how their kids interacted with the parents with other adults, with younger and older siblings. And I said, I really like that for our family. So that's why we started. And I have homeschooled the whole way through. I have 4 children, aged 18 to 24. So I am officially done homeschooling. At least this generation, right? And I'd love to talk to you about high school. That was my favorite time homeschooling, was the high school years.
I'm Ann Roseveld. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Ann Roseveld. I have 5 children, ages 16 to 27. We've graduated 3 from homeschool. And I think I put on my bio that the first time I heard about homeschooling, I was like, yeah, well, that's not for me. But then we ended up homeschooling all of our kids, starting with the oldest in kindergarten. And it has just been a real blessing for our family. I have at one time homeschooled up to 5 ages at once, so I understand about trying to juggle different parts of your life. And so that's something I can talk about tonight. And also anything else that, us homeschoolers, we can talk about homeschooling forever. So if you have any questions, this is a great place to get them answered.
Hi everyone, I'm Leanne VanBeek. I have 3 children who are 12, 10, and 8, and I started homeschooling pretty much because my husband made me. And I can say that because he's in the back and I know he'll really appreciate me bringing that up. But no, in all honesty, he was very intrigued by the idea. He really liked the concept. I went into it reluctantly. One of the things I'm going to talk about tonight is being a working parent and homeschooling. I was working full time and I really liked my job and I didn't want to stop. So that'll be one of the unique things I'll talk about, with how we have kind of balanced, or not balanced, both. As well as I was also involved with starting up a homeschool co-op because I had no clue what I was doing homeschooling, and I wanted some other families around us for the journey, and that's turned out to be just an amazing, amazing resource for us and for our family.
And I am Courtney Remy. We began homeschooling when my oldest were like 2 and 3, and I was kind of forced to be a stay-at-home mom when we moved out to Pennsylvania for my husband's postdoc. And I really just kind of wanted to do more with my kids than change diapers and, like clean up after them. And so I said, let's try this like actually doing school together thing, and buying books at garage sales and kind of making school time and just kind of playing with it turned out to be more enjoyable for myself and them. And I felt like we were doing great things together that just kind of progressed one year after another. And here we are. We moved to Midland about 6 years ago, maybe 7 now. We got our foster license and we had placement of at the time 2-year-old little boy, and worked with the Head Start program that he was in before he came to us. So I have kind of some experience with that, as well as a 6-year-old boy when he was placed with us. And so he attended one of the local elementary schools, as you need to when you're in foster care. He was there for about 1.5 years before he was adopted, and then transitioned home to homeschooling. So I definitely have some things I could speak to about transitioning from the public elementary school to homeschooling. So we also just added a new baby for fun, because, again, life gets boring. You're like, let's have another baby, do something different. So that's a total of 6. So like Anne, too, I'm used to, doing schoolwork and learning with a lot of different ages of children. And then slight work, my family and I work at the community center 2 hours a week, kind of supervising one of the jungle gym times. That was something we took on. And I'm a contingent therapist at a rehab company. And that's terms used very lightly, like one day a month or so. So a little bit of working here and there outside of the home, again, just because it can be a really great experience.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, Ben, we're going to lead off with you, and just want to hear a little bit about the legal side of homeschooling. Actually, before we do that, we're going to start off with the definition of kind of differences between homeschooling and a public virtual school and things, and then can you speak to us about legal requirements for homeschooling?
So you can suffer through this first part, but it's going to give you the framework and the context to think about helping your child learn at home. So when it comes to home-based education, there are several different ways you can go, and any decision you make is going to be a trade-off between more freedom and more structure, or more cost and less cost. But there's benefits and trade-offs for any kind of education option you choose. just so you know up front, the Mackinac Center recently created a web page all about trying to help parents think through this time. It's called MI School at Home, mischoolatHome.org, so it's Michigan School at Home. And we put on there some basic overview of some of these things I'm going to talk about, some links to resources that have more depth to them. But here's a good place to start. There's a difference between homeschooling and online schooling or virtual schooling or cyber schools. These are all usually used interchangeably and somewhat synonymously. A cyber school is a public charter school and operates under the state's public charter school law, which means it's tuition free, which means you'll have some kind of interaction with a certified teacher to guide your child through the learning experience. There's a lot of school districts as well that operate under similar terms, and those are online programs at the district level. Some districts also operate hybrid models as well. But those are options that are going to give you more structure and guidance and less freedom and less cost, but maybe not as much control over your time. Those are things to think about. But when it comes to what we actually understand to be homeschooling, which is one of the things we explore, there are actually technically two different ways in Michigan you can homeschool. So Michigan is one of the most friendly states in the country for homeschool freedom. And that's a great thing we have, a great opportunity we have. This all stems back to a 1993 Supreme Court decision called the DeYoung case, where they recognize that parents have this right to, if they opt out of the system, they can have this freedom to homeschool. The first option is the pure homeschool option, and that is I don't have to register with anybody. I don't have to tell anybody necessarily that I'm going to homeschool. I can let my local district know as a courtesy, but this gives me more freedom to operate a homeschool. And the only thing you have to do is educate your child at home with an organized educational program and cover certain subjects: English, spelling, language arts, math, science, history, civics. The second option is the non-public school option. It's probably the less common option, and we'll talk about a little later why there might be some people who want to pursue this approach more, but basically it requires you to notify your local superintendent and just basically some very basic information about your child's ages, your address, and things like that. And then you become technically a non-public school in the state of Michigan, or a private school. And there's certain trade-offs that come with that as well. I think we'll talk about those a little bit later, but that should be a good overview. Oh, one last thing, the non-public school, the basic requirement in state law is if you operate that way, is you have to provide your students a course or a course of study that parallels the local public school system. It doesn't have to be the exact same curriculum, but it has to kind of parallel the subjects that are being taught in the public school. And there are resources online, the Michigan State Academic Standards. You can find them and look them up if you want to know what a third grader needs to know, fifth grader, and so on. So I think that's a good answer.
All right, great. We are going to talk a little bit about tracking, making sure that your kids are on track with where they need to be and with record keeping. For those of you who are hoping to maybe head back to a public school or a regular, a more traditional school in hopefully next year, we'll be past this by then. We're going to talk about how you can keep pace with what the traditional schools would be doing. Leanne, you've researched this a lot. I know you're probably one of the only ones among us who've really looked at the state standards. You kind of love looking at those. So can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Yeah, sure. The first thing that I was asked to address is if I do decide to withdraw my child from the public school system, how do I do that? And it's actually a pretty simple process. It's not required that you do anything, but it's strongly recommended that you contact your district and let them know that you will be homeschooling this year or doing a different method with your child. I would say that if you are someone who likes documentation and would feel more comfortable, kind of a one-up to this would be send a letter right to your superintendent's office letting them know of your decision, and then request a read receipt on that letter. That means that the office will send you back something saying that they've received your letter and that you have that confirmation. And in terms of record keeping, though you will probably never need it, you can keep a copy of the letter you sent and the district's recognition that that's what you're doing, okay? The reason you might want to do this is I know of a couple parents whose like kids really battled like chronic illness, and then they started getting like truancy officer calls and wanting to know where the child was. And so if you have this, it's just a simple way to kind of cover your bases and make sure that you're set, that the school is informed about what you're doing. In terms of state requirements, so when I started, like I said, I was a public school kid, and when I started, I didn't know what I was doing. So the Michigan Department of Education website was a very reassuring website for me. If you go to that website, you can search for and find PDF documents of every subject that is taught in the public school K through 12 curriculum, and then grade level by grade level, it will show you what they are going to be learning and focusing on that year. So skills and content. If you go there and look at this and you realize, oh man, third grade science, this stinks, it's all geology, and my son hates this, the freedom of homeschooling is you don't have to do that. There are other options. You can look at the whole K-5 curriculum and say, okay, we'll do a little geology, but he's really into biology. Let's spend a lot more time on that, okay? For a K through 8th grade student, as Ben mentioned, there's only 5 subjects that you actually need to be teaching your kids. And because I'm a big acronym person, I had to remember it as Mr. S, ESS, okay? And so it's math, reading, English, which sometimes go hand in hand, science, and social studies. Okay, if you have a 9th through 12th grader, that's where you start adding in some of the civics and government requirements, some of the foreign language, working towards those 22 credits that they need to graduate from high school, which we have 2 very seasoned ladies to talk about more. I don't have high schoolers yet. So again, in terms of keeping pace, I started by looking at the school's curriculum that they were teaching. We then taught the curriculum that we thought fit best for our kids and still kind of kept pace a little bit with what the schools were doing. And then at the end of the years, again, something else that just gave me assurance at the beginning was there are a lot of free online assessments. If you just search for reading comprehension for 6th graders, or if you search for a 3rd grade math end of the year assessment, you can find a lot of tests that will let you go through and just even sort of benchmark how are my kids doing. Okay, so that's the second thing that we did. The third thing I did that was really, really scientific was I asked my kids' friends pretty frequently, like what were they doing in school, what kinds of things were they learning, and so again, that's another thing that you can do if that is helpful for you. I will say this, and someone else had mentioned this to me before the session, that if you think about how many times families move from one school district to another, and potentially have not learned the same content or curriculum that the school they're moving into has experienced, it happens all the time. So while this year may feel very disrupting and like, oh gosh, if we get out, how will we ever get back in? It really is something that people go through all the time. And I don't think it's as critical to stay right with what the schools teach as it may feel. Obviously, some subjects you may need a progression, but if I can take any stress out of that for you, you have maybe a little more flexibility with that than it may feel like right now.
Great, thank you, Leanne. That's really helpful. Okay, Karen and Ann, you have both graduated high school, so we all look up to you, and we want to know what kind of things did you do to ensure your kids were sort of on track and doing what they needed to each year, and as well just what kind of records you kept, and especially how that may have changed from the elementary years to into the high school years.
Well, during the elementary years, I just kind of kept track of how they were doing, if they had gotten the concepts. They never actually got grades in the elementary school. So it wasn't until the high school that I actually had to sit down and say, okay, what's going to be my A, what's going to be my B levels? And so I had to just decide in high school what that was going to be. In our case, I did 91 through 100 was an A, 81 through 90 was a B. So that's why I went ahead and decided that ahead of time. So when I was also looking at high school, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association has a great website, and they have a lot of tips for high schoolers. And so they have a brochure that gives you 3 different kinds of high school curriculums. So they've got the high school curriculum for the student that is going to go probably to a top college. that's going to be getting a graduate degree probably. So it's a very aggressive high school curriculum layout. And then they have one that's just going to college, but it's not as rigorous as the top school. And then they have one that if they are going into a trade, going into the military, going into maybe an associate degree, what that requirement is. And so they kind of lay out, okay, for this group of people, they need 3 years of math. But the group over here that's going to go to the high college, they need at least 4, maybe a little bit more. So that was a great tool to use to help me figure out what I wanted to do for high school. The other cool thing about homeschooling is that you can tailor it to your child. So I had my oldest son, I knew was never, ever going to be in a technical field, ever. So I took him up through Algebra 2 in math, and then I didn't make him do the pre-calc and calculus, because he's never going to do it. And so he did consumer math, and then he did statistics. So he did some forms of math that he was more likely going to be using. His big thing was writing, so he did a lot more writing curriculum there. My second son, exactly the opposite. He went all the way through calculus because I knew he was going to be an engineering or math, science. So that's another great thing about high school and homeschooling is that you can tailor it. I use an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of tests, and I would also keep a paper copy of the tests for the high schoolers. And then I was able to use the scores that the kids had done to make the transcript. So I actually used a Word document, used a format that I found online, and created a transcript. And all of the colleges had no trouble taking that transcript.
Great. That's fabulous. Thank you. Anne, go ahead and tell us what you did.
Like Leanne said, if you're really worried about what grade level your child's going to be at and you want to get grade specific, you can order curricula that are 3rd grade math, 3rd grade science, 3rd grade whatever. So I think you won't have any trouble finding something like that. If you're teaching multiple kids, you might want to go for a unit study approach, which we'll get into later, but it doesn't have to always be targeted at their grade. It can be targeted more at a spread of grades like elementary or high school or junior high. And that can help you if you're trying to teach more than one student at a time. It saves time, and they still get to interact with each other while they're learning. I brought along some examples of my record keeping. When I was in elementary, or my kids were in elementary grades, I also did not give them grades. This is a learning time. I didn't think it was necessary for grades because grades usually in the public school are really for the parents, so that the parents know how they're doing. So when I kept my records, I just used a Sharpie marker for elementary ages. I just wrote the year and their names on the front. And I just kept track each day of what we did for each student. I just wrote it in. Because really what you're trying to do is show that you're making progress in whatever it is you're teaching. So if you can demonstrate that your child is moving ahead in the subjects, that's what this record keeping is for in the elementary ages. Then when my kids got to high school, I went to a modified unit study where they published a nice schedule for me. So I would just copy it out of the book. This is a week's worth of homework. And I would write the notes in there of what we had done, or if they were already there, I'd just check it off. And then at the bottom, I would add extra things that we were doing at co-op or any other classes, like my daughter took art classes at the Center for the Arts, that kind of thing. And then this was for daily and weekly records. Then at the end of the year, whether they were in high school or elementary school, I would sit down and write down each class they took and the book and publisher that they used for that class. That way I have it always, and if someone ever wants to see it, here it is. And then I don't have to save all the books either. The other thing I did for my high schoolers was, like Karen had talked about, I made a high school transcript, and I just downloaded a form from a website that had a transcript form on it. And every year, at the end of the year, I just fill in the classes, figure out the grade point, figure out the cumulative points, or cumulative grade point average, and then I'm done. I try to do that by the end of June, and this year I am not making it. But anyway, that helped me keep track of what was going on throughout the year on a daily basis. And then at the end of the year, I could kind of tie it all up mentally and make sure I had all the records I would need for the future.
Great. It's fun to see what everybody does. So we're taking notes over here too. And I'll also note just really briefly, Leanne and I think both have planners for our kids, even though they're younger. Mostly we write out the planners. We say, hey, you need to do this. But then we just keep those planners. So it's similar to what Anne has, but it's sort of just like, this is what it helps us to stay on track, and then we're also have a record of that. So I'm better at doing it before rather than recording it after, so that might help some of you. Okay, so we're gonna move on to curriculum a little bit, and in the resource packet that I emailed to you and that is out on the resources table, and if you didn't get that, come see me. It's not exhaustive. It's a lot of resources that I have found helpful, and that others as well. I want to point out just a couple. The first is my piece of advice to new homeschoolers is to look at the different methods of homeschooling. There's kind of like 5 or 6 really basic methods, classical and Charlotte Mason and Unschooler and stuff, traditional. So there's a link to a couple things you can read about that. That's really helpful. That then also shows you kind of what curriculum you could do based on that, the method that seems to work well for you, just your personality, your style, your family. Are you just generally more structured? Are you more free-flowing? You're gonna find, something that fits you. And then you're gonna be able to see, this kind of curriculum, and that's on those links as well, point you to curricula that are helpful for those specific methods. And once you are looking for a curriculum, just want to point out the Rainbow Resources has an amazing chart. I just found it. I wish I had had it like 4 years ago. That compares a bunch of different curriculum that they sell, but it's very comprehensive. Lists, whether it's secular or Christian, or how teacher intensive it is. Is it, can kids just open it and go? How much, is it expensive? Is it cheaper? Just a lot of stuff. It's really great. Kathy Duffy also has a website that does that, but it's not laid out in a chart like Rainbow Resources. So with all that said, I just want to briefly ask our panelists kind of how you have chosen your curriculum for various ages, and especially we had some questions about doing group projects, and some of you may want to just kind of try and combine those ages like some of you are mentioning. So we'll just go down the line. Karen, why don't you go ahead and start us off, and also if you can give we had questions about typical costs for your curriculum. That may vary, and I'm asking you to keep to 2 minutes, so talk fast.
Okay. I'll mostly talk about the high school curriculum. When I was first starting out, though, the best resource I found was finding a mom who had kids slightly older than my kids and seeing what they liked. There was a mom who had 3 boys, and I knew if those 3 boys liked the curriculum, my 3 boys would like the curriculum. So ask around and see what people had done. If you can get your hands on a curriculum, that always helps. In high school, you can tailor the curriculum to the child. As I said, my oldest child, I found a 1-year adventure novel where they actually write a novel in a year. So the first half of the year, they talk about the structure of a novel and what makes a good novel, and then they make notes, and in the second half of the year, they actually write a 12-chapter novel. So that was kind of cool. So there's some really interesting curriculum out there. There's almost too much curriculum. So look around, especially if you have a child that has a particular bent, look for that kind of curriculum. When I was in high school, we did do some online classes because one of my children wanted to learn French. I don't know French. So we went through the Potter School. The costs there are usually $400, $450 if the class meets once a week, $650 if it meets twice a week. So they would meet for an hour and a half. the teacher would teach, and then they would have homework or projects throughout the week. And that was really good, especially if you don't know a certain language. We used them for several other different kinds of classes. There was a creative writing class, so we really liked that. We also participated in a local debate club that Ken Ministry, a local homeschool group, runs, and also robotics. So that also kind of added to our high school curriculum. So look for those other curriculum that are outside of the classroom too.